Thank you for participating in the Texas Juvenile Justice Department's e-learning course. My name is Erica Delabas, and I will be narrating today's training on cultural equity. Before we begin, please ensure you have downloaded the participant guide, as we will refer to it throughout the course. After you have printed your guide, advance to the next slide to continue. This e-learning course is provided as an alternative to a live training presentation. The Juvenile Justice Training Academy does not guarantee that this option is in any way more or less suitable to prepare the trainee for the performance of their job duties. It is the sole responsibility of the employer to ensure that trainees are adequately prepared for the TJJD certification exam. Scenarios may be included. However, activities have been removed when interaction or engagement with others would be required. Scenarios, if used, are to evaluate comprehension of the material by the trainee and not intended to provide examples from the certification exam. Upon completion of viewing this e-learning course, the employer is responsible for completing any and all necessary documentation that the training on this mandatory topic was completed by the trainee. No certificate will be generated after viewing this e-course. Thank you.
People have different perspective on diversity. Some people think it's all about race and gender. Some people think it's about different ethnicity or like sexual orientation. Actually, it includes all that.
I think it's really appreciating people's differences, understanding that we all come with different social biases, different ways we think of how to do things.
For me to enjoy my job, I need to be able to show who I truly am. And so if I can bring my whole self to work, then I'm going to be a very productive team member.
People talk about it being a competitive advantage. That makes sense, but it's also the right thing to do.
Diversity is a reality and inclusion is a choice. So I think we obviously live in a really diverse world, and that's why it's so important to really understand that and appreciate it.
So when you talk about decision making and who's actually in the room making decisions, you're getting as many diverse opinions as possible.
I think it's so important to see people who look like you at the top, because that could be you one day.
I've been very fortunate in terms of picking schools and employers that understand the importance of not only diversity but also inclusion.
The inclusion component is how do you leverage those dimensions of difference to bring forth the business results you want, right? So it's taking the box of 96 crayons and making the picture.
You can definitely learn the skills, and I would say that you would have to have those skills in order to be successful in the business environment these days. It's not just the business skills, the finance skills.
I would love to be in a leadership position where I can really influence globally leaders and peers and just everyone really at the company. So crossing my fingers.
Let's review the course objectives for the course today. At the end of this course, you should be able to describe how cultural identity is formed, explain the impacts of culture, and apply strategies for fostering cultural equity in a professional setting. Culture is the social heritage or traditions of a group. It includes all learned and shared conscious or unconscious beliefs, knowledge, standards, values, attitudes, and behaviors. Culture shapes the way we view the world around us. It helps guide our interactions with others by filtering and organizing information in our environment. Culture influences our thoughts, opinions, and feelings on issues such as politics, health, communication, and how to handle conflict. When we speak of culture, we typically think of ethnicity or a shared identity related to racial characteristics, social values, language, and geographical space, and race or physical genetics and characteristics. However, ethnicity and race are not the only identifiers that fall under the umbrella of culture. Additional identifiers may include socioeconomic status, education, nationality, clothing, food, faith, religion, rituals, art, drama, music, gender, customs, age, generations, language, and sexual orientation. These identifiers allow us to quickly categorize our environment into groups and differentiate between various cultures in the world according to our own cultural beliefs. For example, you may process a juvenile not looking you directly in the eye or standing very close to you as a sign of disrespect or rudeness. However, in another culture, the reverse may be true. There are many types of cultures, including ethnic, religious, geographic, sports, corporate, and academic culture. Most people belong to one or more larger culture and many smaller subgroups of the larger culture known as subcultures. A subculture is a smaller group within a larger culture with ideas, beliefs, or interests which vary from the larger culture, usually in level of intensity. Subcultures conform with the large group in some ways but differ in others. These groups may be made up of individuals that agree with some of the larger culture's beliefs, standards, or attitudes, but hold an opposing view on others. Feel more strongly than the large group about a particular belief or standard of practice already implemented but not strongly enforced. Share a common belief or standard different than the mainstream group. If being an American is the large culture, what might be an American subculture? Some examples are Catholic culture, street culture, Irish culture, gang culture, homeless culture, social media culture, soccer mom culture, baby boomer culture, wealthy culture, and CrossFit culture are just a few of the numerous subcultures that exist. Turn to your participant guide to the activity titled Connections. Take a moment to list all of the subcultures that you belong to. Even though we may have many differences with those from other cultures, there is a possibility we have more in common than we think. Think for a minute the list of subcultures that you create and what some of the specific traits or characteristics of your different cultural groups may be. Within every professional community, there are also cultures and subcultures. In the probation community, we have subcultures including facility culture, juvenile supervision officer culture, juvenile probation officer culture, and juvenile culture. However, professional culture is at the heart of our jobs. Some examples of common professional traits you have as a group that supervise juveniles on probation are communication skills, decision-making ability, and organizational skills. Now that we've defined what culture is on both a large and small scale, let's narrow the discussion further by examining the origins of your personal cultural identity. Culture is learned and then shared. Our own personal culture identity encompasses traditions, knowledge, values, and behaviors typically passed on to us through our environment, family, friends, and the media. For most of us, identifying with our particular culture is a natural, unconscious process, and rarely do we think about why we connect with particular groups. Culture is communicated from one generation to the next by experience and participation. So your cultural identity is developed over time and in stages. These stages include unexamined ethnic identity. Ethnic identity is not personal. Family and media determine your beliefs. Ethnic identity search. Actively searching for what ethnicity means to you. Questioning of your beliefs, often triggered by family events. Exploring culture as a whole. Ethnic identity achievement. Culture is confidently accepted and internalized. Worldview is determined. Dictates how stereotypes and biases are processed. And a secure sense of self is fostered. By early adulthood, most people have gone through these three stages and developed a solid idea of who they are and what they believe. Culture shapes who we are individually and as a society. Let's talk about the specific impact culture has on our lives. Various cultures impact our lives on a daily basis. Whether it is our personal culture or someone else's, we can feel the effects of culture all around us. Culture influences many areas of our lives, including our perceptions, behaviors, communication, personalities, healthcare, and business practices. Culture builds relationships, but it can also tear people apart, causing a breakdown in societal progression. In our communities and the workplace, having a variety of cultures represented can be both beneficial and challenging. Culture shapes our personal identity, supplies the framework for our thoughts and interactions with others, creates various points of view, and generates opportunities for learning, understanding, and growth. Some benefits culture creates for groups or individuals include a group or personal identity, character building, a sense of belonging, a sense of security, boundaries for how we treat ourselves and others, values and morals, constant individual or group progression, a connection between generations, knowledge for survival, adaptations to natural and social environments, shaped personalities and behaviors, a perception and interpretation of events and our environment, and unity with others in our community. What are some ways culture may unify a community? Some examples are patriotism among citizens of a particular country, shared religious beliefs among different churches, and minorities standing up for a cause. The benefits of culture may be received or felt at home, with friends, in the workplace, or with juveniles you supervise. We'll discuss several additional personal benefits later. For now, remember cultures are beneficial because they allow us to expand our personal views of the world. Even with all of the benefits, culture also presents us with some unique cultural challenges. While we understand and closely identify with our own cultures and subcultures, challenges may arise with cultures we don't belong to. To fill in the gaps of missing information, we often rely on the thoughts, ideas, and opinions of our family, friends, community, and the media. Their views, though well-intentioned, may be distorted and lead to misunderstandings, conflicts, or intense hostility. These cultural challenges include stereotypes, biases, assumptions, prejudice, and discrimination. In your participant guide, turn to the activity entitled, "Do You Know the Difference?" There you will find a list of common terms often associated with the challenges of culture. You may take a moment to write the definitions of the terms listed in the space provided. We will be discussing each of these terms at length today. As we do so, refer back to your definitions to see how closely your interpretation matches up with the one provided in the course. Let's begin with stereotypes. The information, true or not, we use to fill in the gaps about a particular group or culture may turn into strong beliefs or stereotypes. These often lead us to believe everyone or everything in a particular group are identical. For example, some may believe all Hispanics are Catholic, or all African Americans play basketball. Typically, these oversimplified ideas form early and are influenced by family, friends, and the media. Let's watch a short video clip from the show The Office.
Okay, do me. Something stereotypical so I can get it really quick.
Okay, I like your food.
Outback Steakhouse. I'm Australian, mate.
Pam.
No.
Pam, come on. I like your food. No, come on. Stir the pot. Stir the melting pot, Pam. Let's do it. Let's get ugly. Let's get real.
Okay. If I have to do this, based on stereotypes that are totally untrue, that I do not agree with, you would maybe not be a very good driver.
Oh, man, am I a woman?
Once we've placed people, groups, or ideas into stereotyped categories, we begin to label them as good or bad. Look at these pictures. Which do you think is good and which is bad? Rap or rock music? Hot dog or hamburger? Soccer or basketball? Cat or dog? Often, we have no justification for deciding one group is better or worse than another. Yet, we consciously and unconsciously make these determinations or biases based on the same influences mentioned earlier. Let's take a moment to watch a brief video about bias.
Biased beliefs and attitudes can be both positive and negative. You may have a deep-seated belief that basketball is a better sport than football. You may prefer strawberry to raspberry jam. These are conscious biases that are not inherently negative. Unconscious bias is different, and it's something we all have, simply because we're human. It's the set of automatic preferences deep in our brains that instantaneously influence our decisions and how we perceive people and situations without our conscious awareness. Through unconscious bias, our minds make quick decisions we are not aware of so that we can feel comfortable, safe, and confident.
Our conscious biases are clear and obvious. We are aware we like pop music over opera and dislike snakes more than birds. However, we also have unconscious biases we are completely unaware of, shaping the way we think about others. We'll talk more about unconscious biases later. Preferring CNN over Fox, believing the Green Party is worse than Democrats, or viewing brown-eyed people as more beautiful than blue-eyed people are just a few more examples of biases. Examples of biases in the workplace may include deciding girls are difficult to work with because they are all emotional, deciding Hispanics are all bad because they are in gangs, deciding nerdy Caucasian juveniles are bad because they are all in custody for sex offenses, deciding all Asian American youth are easy to supervise because they are all respectful. Biases may occur based on race, gender, age, gender identity, physical ability, religion, sexual orientation, or weight. Regardless, biases are most often grounded in inaccurate ideas, leading to embarrassing mistakes and assumptions. Based on biases we've formed, we may make assumptions about others. An assumption is something accepted as truth without proof. It can be imposed on an event, an idea, a person, or group of people. For example, speculating a new doctor we meet will be a man, or thinking someone named Kelly is a woman. Let's discuss some other examples by looking at some pictures. What are your first impressions of each of these people? What words come to mind as you look at them? And how do you feel about each of them? Now take a look at these pictures. What are your impressions? What words come to mind as you look at them? And how do you feel about each of them? Now, take a look at this last set of pictures. Now, what are your impressions? What words come to mind as you look at them? And how do you feel about each of them? Our stereotypes and biases may lead to assumptions, often based on inaccurate information provided by those influences previously discussed. These people are all successful, yet assumptions may place them in stereotyped groups that fail to consider their individual merit. Let me read you a story. As you listen, take note of any assumptions you may hear. A woman and her family recently moved to a new neighborhood. One day, while driving to work, the new woman waves hello to a neighbor picking up a newspaper from his driveway. The neighbor looks at her but does not wave back. The woman waves to her neighbor each day for weeks, but the result is always the same. One night, the woman tells her family they may have made a mistake in moving to the neighborhood because the people don't seem very friendly. Think about what your thoughts are about the neighbor's behavior or the neighborhood. Now let's go back to the scenario. One day after work, the woman stops by the mailboxes to pick up her mail, and another woman walks up. The woman greets the new woman and apologizes for not coming to her and her family's home to welcome them to the neighborhood. The woman explains her husband recently had a stroke and is in therapy to regain the use of muscles on his right side. She tells the new woman her husband really appreciates the wave he receives from her each day. It really makes his day. She also tells the new neighbor they would like to invite them for dinner when her husband is up for guests. As the new woman walks away, she is remorseful about the incorrect assumptions she made. Now think about the assumptions you heard in the scenario. Without ever meeting her neighbors, the woman assumed the man in her new neighborhood was unfriendly because he didn't wave back. In reality, he was simply unable to. She also made assumptions about the entire neighborhood based on her interactions with one person. These assumptions led her to the wrong conclusions. Some examples of assumptions in the workplace may include thinking all African American juveniles like sports, thinking a pregnant woman is married to a heterosexual man. Making assumptions or accepting truth without proof may lead to a negative form of bias called prejudice. When we determine everyone in a stereotyped group is bad, we are biased against the group. If we go a step further and harbor ill feelings toward, lack respect for, or fail to value opinions of a group based on falsehoods, we are being prejudiced. Prejudice or preconceived opinions and feelings may include harsh feelings toward all Asian Americans because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, failing to value the opinion of women despite women's rights, lacking respect for gay men or women because they are sexually oriented differently than the majority of the population. Some examples of prejudice in the workplace may include hating to work with Hispanic families because they are all uneducated and only speak Spanish, refusing to work with juveniles with mental health issues because they use their illness as a crutch, avoiding LGBT coworkers because of their presumed sexual attraction to all heterosexuals. If these prejudices about others escalate, they often lead to repression and hostility, or discrimination. Discrimination refers to the act of denying rights or opportunities to an individual or group because of specific characteristics. This mistreatment comes in many forms, but some of the most common or familiar are ageism, discrimination based on age; racism, discrimination based on physical characteristics; sexism, discrimination based on gender, including gender identity, sexual orientation, and pregnancy. Some individuals or groups endure discrimination based on disability, genetic information, for example, family medical history, national origin, and religion. Some examples of discrimination include a taxi driver passing a disabled person because he or she doesn't want to deal with their extra needs; a company requiring all senior level employees age 65 and over to retire because of budget constraints despite experience or longevity; a supervisor rewarding a man with a raise but not a woman with the same title, job description, time of service, and job performance. Discrimination in the workplace may include refusing to work sex offenders because they cannot be rehabilitated, refusing to recommend a juvenile's release from detention because of a mental health issue that indicates he or she cannot be trusted in the community, refusing to call a transgender person by their preferred pronoun. These 5 cultural challenges often lead to other hurdles. Some additional hurdles stemming from cultural challenges include disparities, miscommunication, misunderstandings, and media control. When biases are left unchecked, disparities present within a system begin to reveal themselves. Disparities or inconsistencies refer to over or underrepresentation of a particular group in comparison to the population in general. For instance, in the state of Texas, 70% of people are classified as white, 37% are Hispanic, and 11% are African American. Yet, the latest data indicates black juveniles are more than 4 times likely to be committed to the juvenile justice system than white juveniles, and American Indian juveniles are 3 times more likely. In addition, Hispanic juveniles are 61% more likely to be committed to the juvenile justice system than their white counterparts. These types of disparities may be due to both conscious and unconscious biases and are often based on ideas about race. We'll talk more about these disparities in a few minutes, but for now, understand discrepancies are data-driven and indicate the possibility of unfair treatment occurring at some point within a system. In general, communication with others can be difficult, whether others share our ideas, opinions, traditions, or not. All of our life perspectives are different, and we look at the world through our own lens. Add to the language barriers, accents, nuances, as well as nonverbal communication like gestures, eye contact, or proximity, and a perfect storm of miscommunication has been created. Miscommunication in the workplace could lead employees to be confused about specific team member roles or uncertainty about assignment details. These issues may cause employee conflict, a drop in morale, and turnover. Here are some examples of miscommunication. A meeting is scheduled to begin at a certain time. One team member from a culture valuing promptness arrives on time, and another team member identifying with a more laid-back culture arrives much later. The first team member may feel slighted by others' lack of punctuality, while the second team member may feel annoyed by the rigid schedule of other colleagues. A juvenile of one culture refuses to look an adult in the eye. The adult may feel this is disrespectful, but the juvenile may have been taught looking at an adult in the eye as a child is a sign of great disrespect. Many intense conflicts in culture stem from simple misunderstandings. Remember, our stereotypes and biases, as inaccurate as they may be, fill in the gaps of information we may be missing about an individual or group. If a particular practice or action by another group or individual seems strange to us, biases we have may lead us to determine this group is bad simply because we do not understand them. We often fear what we do not understand, so we avoid these individuals or groups instead of conversing with them to resolve our confusion. The misunderstandings remain, creating tension and conflict. Other habits which could cause misunderstandings include believing we know what another person is going to say, responding without listening, and incorrectly interpreting information based on our own life experiences. Through the use of our computers, iPads, or smartphones, we are bombarded with information. With the internet and news outlets cycling stories 24 hours a day, we've been conditioned to fear missing the latest news story or trend. We are constantly connected to the cyber world, where we become overwhelmed with images, news, and stories about politics, injustices, or crimes that may or may not be true. Oftentimes, we merely scan titles of articles, failing to fact-check the information we are receiving. These images and stories on television, the internet, and social media often influence our perceptions and ideas about certain groups or cultures. Before we know it, we end up forming stereotypes, developing biases, and making assumptions about individuals or groups we truly know nothing about. Malcolm X, a civil rights activist from the 1950s and 60s, had an interesting take on the media. The media's the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and to make the guilty innocent, and that's power, because they control the mind of the masses. What are your feelings about this quote? When we lack knowledge about other cultures, we rely on stereotypes for easy understanding, but those may lead to biases, which can develop into prejudiced feelings. Those feelings may become so intense we may begin to discriminate by berating others, leaving them out, ignoring them, or yelling at them. People can end up hurt, bullied, or killed simply because their culture is perceived as different. Now, let's turn the discussion to how culture specifically impacts us in the workplace. We are all influenced by culture daily. In the work environment, various cultures among employees increase productivity and effectiveness. It allows coworkers to see things from a new angle or address problems they didn't know existed. Diverse backgrounds can also lead to creativity, new ideas, and thinking outside the box during problem-solving discussions. Other workplace cultural benefits include opportunities to learn, professional conflict resolution, respect for different opinions, shared ideas. Cultural challenges can also present themselves in the workplace, including delays on projects or in resolving issues, failure to support coworkers, lack of communication, lack of understanding, and safety issues. Workplace challenges may lead to a lack of trust with leadership, a decrease in morale, a lack of motivation, or a failure to work as a team. When cultural challenges arise among colleagues, the safety of juveniles and their families are at risk. Although the juvenile justice system has many individuals committed to equitable care of juveniles, the system has a prevalence of disparities, often deeply rooted in race and ethnicity. Reforms implemented over the last few years to reduce juvenile arrest have not been shared equally with juveniles of color. In juvenile probation departments around the state, juveniles of color are often overrepresented in specific areas, such as secure placement rates, security referrals, TJJD commitments, and court referrals. For instance, out of 1,000 juveniles, approximately 49 African American juveniles were referred for court action, compared to roughly 20 Hispanic juveniles and 14 white juveniles in 2016. Disparities are not just prevalent with regard to race and ethnicity, though. Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender LGBT juveniles are also overrepresented in the juvenile justice system. Though they comprise just 7 to 9% of the nationwide population, LGBT juveniles represent 20% of the juvenile justice system. These disparities often lead to harmful treatment or unfair outcomes and are often caused by cultural differences. You will learn more about LGBT disparities and strategies to overcome them in the Gender and Sexuality, a Changing Perspective course. For now, keep in mind, reducing the challenges of culture in the workplace not only fosters equitable treatment for everyone, but also serves to eliminate disparities and equality. Let's move on and talk about varying cultural perspectives and the one most important to adopt as a juvenile justice professional. Through the years, many groups and individuals have developed varying approaches to overcoming the challenges of culture. Many perspectives have emerged, including cultural diversity. Cultural diversity encourages us to recognize differences in one another, acknowledge they exist, and accept each other as we are. Cultural competence. Cultural competence is the ability of an agency or individual to interact and work effectively with people of different cultures. Cultural humility. Cultural humility encourages each person to be the expert of their own culture. Recognize we are not experts of others' cultures, and realize we do not have all the answers. With cultural humility, we must ask questions, be humble enough to learn, and be diligent in applying the knowledge we receive. Cultural equity. Cultural equity is providing every person with what they need to be successful. While standards are still met and policies and procedures in a department or agency are followed, equitable decisions about individuals are made on a case-by-case basis. To overcome cultural challenges, the perspectives of diversity, competence, and humility all play a role in creating an equally respectful and safe environment for everyone. It is cultural equity that allows us to move beyond cultural differences and treat people based on their needs rather than what group they belong to. The U.S. Constitution states we are all created equal. While the Founding Fathers likely meant each of us has the same worth, the same value, that one individual is as valuable as the next, we, in fact, are not created equal in any other way except our humanity. There are no two people alike, even identical twins who look physically similar, have different life experiences, health issues, and opinions. Many have interpreted the constitutional idea of equality as everyone being entitled to the same things, but this only benefits some individuals or groups and not others. However, treating everyone equitably means ensuring everyone receives what they need to be successful. What one person needs to be successful is not necessarily the same for another. To overcome cultural challenges like racial and ethnic disparities, it is essential for departments and agencies to support a professional culture centered on cultural equity where all individuals are treated fairly. Let's talk about some strategies we can adopt to cultivate equity. To foster a culture of equity, it's not only important to overcome existing systemic barriers built into an organization, but to also determine how we as individuals can be culturally equitable. Remember, the challenges of culture can ultimately lead to unfair treatment of various groups, as evidenced by the racial and ethnic disparities mentioned earlier. Systemic barriers are often deep-rooted and require intervention from stakeholders able to make decisions affecting change. Departments should be committed to removing all cultural systemic barriers, and by doing so, the unfair treatment of individuals may be eliminated. Some suggested strategies departments may implement in an effort to reduce disparities. Provide all staff with training on cultural equity. Gather local data highlighting areas of disparity. And establish a local racial and ethnic disparity or RED team to analyze data and create strategies to reduce particular disparities. While departments and agencies focus on removing systemic barriers, we as individuals must be focused on creating a professional culture centered on cultural equity. A professional culture involves employees adhering to agency policies and procedures, maintaining a courteous, cooperative, and helpful attitude toward coworkers, and treating juveniles with concern, empathy, respect, and fairness. To build a culture of equity while maintaining professionalism, it is essential to treat juveniles, their families, and coworkers fairly and provide everyone with what they need to be successful. To do this, we can implement several strategies to navigate those cultural challenges precluding us to being fair. Individual strategies. Not all the actions discussed are listed in the participant guide. Increase personal growth. Examine how our own personal culture was founded and shaped. As stereotypes and biases are learned, knowing how our own culture was shaped helps us understand why we behave or believe the way we do. Identify how our own culture influences our treatment of others. Understanding our own culture's behaviors helps us recognize why we treat people the way we do. Make connections with others that don't look like us. Finding opportunities to meet new people and get to know their personal stories helps us relate with those different from ourselves. See how others live. Seeing where others come from firsthand provides us with a different perspective and helps us realize we often have no idea the hardships or joys others may be experiencing. When in doubt, ask questions. Do not assume anything, for usually nothing is as it first seems. Research beliefs, ideas, or behaviors causing hesitation. Take time to study those things hard to comprehend to gain understanding. Don't take anything seen or read at face value. Understand there is always more to the story. Take a break from media outlets. Disconnect from television or cable, smartphones, iPads, or the internet on occasion, as it helps eliminate a strong and powerful source of bias. Make a conscious effort to change our mindset. It can be difficult to change undesirable thoughts, some of which may have been developing for quite some time. As discussed earlier, we must first recognize our biased thinking and then attempt to change it. One way to learn and change the way we think is to practice. Nothing is more effective at helping us learn than practice. Practice affects change in the brain. For example, if we're not used to talking with someone of another culture, we must talk to them as often as we can to become practiced at it. Keep biases in check. Acknowledge biases exist. Some believe when discrimination has been addressed, there is no further need to discuss the issue, while others simply believe they are not biased. However, discrimination occurs every day, in many forms, and everyone has biases, both conscious and unconscious. Avoid any preconceived notions or assumptions. Initial encounters with others must be free of judgment and stereotypes. Reject any negative images as truth. It is easy to cast judgment because of a negative image or experience, but often what we see isn't the whole picture. One experience does not reflect an entire group, and we must decide if we will either allow our experiences to taint our views or educate ourselves about the world around us. Recognize disparities others face. All disparities must be identified and addressed, particularly those racial and ethnic in nature, and those affecting LGBT juveniles in the juvenile justice system. Confirmed decisions are being made based on an individual's needs. Fairness is driven by making decisions based on individual needs and not on identifiers such as age, race, or gender. Consider all information about a situation. To be objective and equitable, all information in a situation must be considered. Remember, each juvenile must be seen as an individual and treated with respect and dignity. Be aware of your biases at all times. Self-awareness forces us to look inward at both our conscious and unconscious biases. Remember, conscious biases are blatant and obvious, while unconscious biases are outside of our awareness. Conscious biases are more easily identified and managed, but unconscious biases are out of our control, often leading to disparate treatment of individuals. Let's take a moment to listen to the attorney.
Unconscious biases have evolved to help us make quick, efficient judgments and decisions with minimal mental effort. Because these unconscious biases are automatic, we use them to make judgments and decisions without even realizing that's what we're doing. But if and when we stop to consciously think about it, we might decide our initial hasty judgments don't actually fit with the information we are being presented with. We cannot process all the information we receive. So without knowing it, our minds create mental shortcuts and use our past experiences to help us make quick and efficient decisions. Take a look at this list of colors. Try and name the colors as quickly as possible while ignoring the words. Now, do the same thing with this list. Name the colors, not the words. While it may take a little longer to identify the colors in the second list because we aren't relying on color-coded shortcuts, taking the extra time to take in and process more information is worth it because more data helps us make more accurate decisions. Considering all the information instead of making a decision based on the information that comes to mind most quickly can help us avoid relying only on our preconceptions.
Unconscious biases cause us to be blind to stereotypes, effectively requiring us to rely on faulty assumptions when making decisions. For example, a university group was in the process of hiring a manager for the science department. Unbeknownst to the interviewers, the resumes of the last two applicants were identical, with the exception of the names. One was masculine and the other feminine. Without meeting either applicant, the interviewers overwhelmingly agreed the person with the masculine name was the best candidate for the position. The group's unconscious bias of males being more qualified in science caused them to make a flawed, uninformed decision regarding the position. Although they may have had good intentions, the interviewers needed to shift their decision-making to ensure they were treating all applicants equitably. Let's move on to the next strategy you can implement to overcome cultural challenges. Perform constant self-assessments. Verified decisions are made based on needs and not biases. We must ask ourselves if our decisions are based on an individual's actual needs. Question regularly whether any biases are affecting our decisions. We must ask ourselves if our decisions are based merely on someone being from the same culture as we are or on individual needs. Examine personal feelings or responses to a situation. We must investigate the root cause of why we have certain feelings or react to situations in a certain way. Take the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. This test is part of Project Implicit, created by researchers interested in the thoughts and feelings outside of a person's conscious awareness and control. Taking this test allows you to see what your unconscious preferences are. Let's watch a video about what occurred when 6 people took the IAT assessment about race.
If someone asked you what you thought about a particular group of people, you could probably answer them, right? Most of us believe that we understand our own brains. We believe that we know how we see the world. But what if our brains were holding on to a whole other set of subconscious opinions? Opinions that were just under the surface, that we didn't even know we had. Psychologists call these implicit attitudes. The media, our friends, everyone we meet, our brain pays attention to all the subtle messages in our life and tries to make sense of it all, creating our implicit attitudes. In order to measure these subconscious attitudes, psychologists created the Implicit Association Test, or IAT. The test has been taken online by over 2 million people. We asked 6 people to take the IAT about race for the very first time.
I'm actually pretty excited about taking this test. I have no doubts that I have some sort of racist tendencies like everybody else on the planet.
I'm afraid of where I grew up, that it's going to reflect on the test even though I don't want it to.
I don't think I'm racist, but this test might tell me that I am. I'd like to know so I can, change my ways.
Okay. They're just presenting me with small amounts of faces and asking me to identify if they're basically white or black people.
Dangerous.
Is this racial profiling?
I'm mostly looking at the noses.
The test feels a little weird.
It's making me uncomfortable.
It's weird because there's like, the words are also associated with the pictures. European is also on the side of bad right now.
The left side is African American or bad, the right side is European American or good.
I feel like it's trying to trick my mind into thinking that these words are associated with these faces.
I feel like I'm getting incepted.
So weird.
Oh, I get it a lot wrong.
This is mind games.
I can feel my heartbeat going faster and faster and faster.
I don't know why I have to think so hard to do this.
Oh, I'm getting really angry.
This is exactly what society tells you.
And it's making me very upset.
Got my results.
Your automatic preference may be described as slight, moderate, strong, or little to no preference.
Your data suggests a slight automatic preference for African American compared to European American.
Your data suggests a strong automatic preference for European American compared to African American.
Your data suggests a slight automatic preference for African American compared to European American.
Your data suggests a slight automatic preference for European American compared to African American.
Your data suggests a moderate automatic preference for African American compared to European American.
Your data suggests a slight automatic preference for European American compared to African American.
I thought I was gonna be like neutral maybe.
I'm not surprised by the results, but I'm also not happy with them.
I'm African American, all my friends are majority African American, my parents are African American, so I feel like my preference is what I've seen almost every single day of my life.
For me, figuring out where my sympathies lie really is so complicated.
Even in like kindergarten or elementary school, like white is like heavenly and like angels. Black is always like associated with like coal or like darkness. So I'm not surprised that that's an automatic response because we've been so conditioned to think that way.
Even if you do have a strong preference for one or the other, it makes no difference if you go through your life like open-hearted and open-minded and just sensitive to other people.
Man, I don't know, it's been pretty emotional.
It opens up dialogue that definitely needs to happen now.
Even if you don't deal with race in your life, a lot of people do.
It's good to be asked, well, why don't you feel as comfortable? And maybe we can change that.
Don't be scared of race. It's like it's there. Everybody should be talking about it. You know, you don't have to be angry and you don't have to be upset and we don't have to talk about like who's got power over who. Like, it's time.
We won't be taking the test during the course today, but you are encouraged to take it on your own to learn about your personal biases about race. After you initially take the assessment, become more aware of your unconscious biases and incorporate strategies from the course today. Redo the assessment. You may find your preferences have shifted. The Project Implicit website has a number of other implicit bias assessments testing biases in other areas, such as disability, weight, sexuality, and religion. Take some time on your own to learn about what other biases you may or may not have. The IAT is just one kind of self-assessment we can take to check our biases. There are 2 more activities in your participant guide. Before we get to the "What do you do?" activity, take a look at the personal self-assessment. This assessment identifies biases we may have and highlights areas we may need to improve. It is up to you to determine what personal changes you may need to make. If your responses are closer to the never category, perhaps you can evaluate your relationships with others and decide what you should do to become more culturally equitable. These assessments may be difficult to answer when being honest with yourself, but ultimately provide opportunities for personal growth. This is an ongoing process of change. You must be patient with yourself when working through personal biases and attempt to eliminate them one by one. Now turn in your participant guide to the activity titled, "What do you do?" Read the scenarios, then use the strategies discussed in the course today. Decide what you would do in the situation and record your answers in your participant guide. These kinds of situations occur regularly, whether supervising juveniles in the community, detention, or treatment centers. By implementing these strategies we discussed earlier, we are better equipped to navigate these often difficult situations. Remember, your biases can be changed over time if we continually assess ourselves for biases and implement the strategies provided in the course today. During all of your interactions with others, remember to be aware of your own culture, value others' differences, keep personal biases in check, and always strive for a professional culture centered in cultural equity. Although we may not admit it, we all struggle with biases. None of us are bad people because we form a stereotype, bias, or assumption about a group or individual. It's whether we allow the often incorrect information to fester and dictate our actions in a harmful way. There are those who are aware of their own biases but don't desire to change them. No one can force them to change their personal beliefs or how to act in a private setting. However, it is important we treat others fairly at all times with dignity and respect. Let's discuss the final strategy to implement when overcoming challenges of culture. Build strong working relationships of trust with coworkers, supervisors, and upper management. Allow everyone a clean slate at initial encounters. Don't judge someone based solely on what you see before you or have heard from others. Navigate differences courteously. Always be respectful when interacting with others. Minimize false conclusions and assumptions. Try not to make assumptions about others, but if you do, assume the best and not the worst. Be mindful of others' cultures and subcultures. We do not know which cultures others belong to, so when interacting with others, choose your words and actions wisely. Listen to others respectfully. Always actively listen when others are talking. Strive to understand each other during daily interactions. Everyone talks, behaves, and acts differently from one another. If someone is not understood, ask polite and respectful questions. Discover similarities with others. Get to know others by asking questions and celebrate the moments when you find something in common. Educate each other on differences through open and honest discussion. People fear what they don't know or understand. To eliminate your fears, educate yourself on other cultures to eliminate stereotypes and debunk biases. Use appropriate language. Being courteous and respectful means using the correct terms, proper pronouns, and classifications with others. For example, when referring to sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression with others, taking the time to ask which pronouns an individual prefers, such as him or her, he or she. These strategies are not the only actions we can take to cultivate a professional culture centered on equity. We must also hold each other responsible for implementing all agency policies and procedures without bias or discrimination. All of us have a responsibility to be respectful of other cultures and beliefs. Despite our best efforts to respond to our personal biases, make equitable decisions, and prevent disparities, others may be unwilling to do the same. Although you cannot change another person's views, you can always role model culturally equitable behavior. Ask someone respectfully to refrain from unfair treatment, and if you see something you deem egregious, follow your local policy and procedure for filing a report. So, final thoughts about today. Our culture defines our identity and shapes our thoughts and behaviors. Culture impacts us through benefits and challenges. To eliminate unfair treatment and disparities, we must use various strategies centered on cultivating cultural equity. We must recognize our biases, change our mindset, and make decisions based on individual need and not a person's background. Thank you for attending and participating in today's course on cultural equity.